Welcome to this special Indigenous Voices edition of the Salt and Light Hour. I'm Deacon Pedro. Early in 2022, we started Indigenous Voices, a little mini-series within the Salt and Light Hour to help us get to know Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people, learn from their stories and legends, and learn about their culture, languages, and spirituality. This is all part of walking together with them towards true healing and reconciliation. So far, we've met several people, First Nations and Métis, from across the country. We've spoken about the residential school system, land claims, child protection and welfare, and intergenerational trauma, among other topics. You can listen to all those conversations on our website, slmedia.org/podcast. Today, we will meet two more people. Shaun Vincent, an accomplished graphic designer from the Red River Métis in Manitoba, and Michele Sam, a university professor, researcher, and consultant from the Ktunaxa people in British Columbia. Both of them speak about the importance of family, language, and pursuing your dreams. I'm Deacon Pedro, and welcome to our 6th episode of our Salt and Light Hour special series, Indigenous Voices. I met Shaun Vincent because he was hired to design the logo for the papal visit to Canada this year. He is the owner of Vincent Design in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and is likely one of the first Indigenous graphic designers in Canada.
I am Shaun Vincent. That's who I am. I am a Métis graphic designer / artist / entrepreneur. / many other things out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, was where I live, but my home is in SLHour, Manitoba, which is a traditional Métis settlement. And that's who I am.
You used the word Michif, and I think people are used to Métis. Is there a distinction, or why is your preference to describe yourself as Michif?
They're both Métis, but Michif is primarily used by Métis people who reside on the traditional Red River settlement. Okay. So it's Métis. It's more of a regional Métis. How about that? And so the Red River settlement is, of course, Winnipeg and the surrounding areas. So and south of that. Yeah, so.
Okay, and then you said that you work, I know, in Winnipeg, but you're based, or you live in Saint Laurent. I think that's where you're from originally. I mean, you grew up there.
I was there as a child a lot. My mom was from there, which is why we were there all the time. And then my mom moved to the city, and then my grandfather gave me the land, and because it was. Under the promise that it stays in the family, never to be sold, because it is traditional. It is very old. It's if my son has a son, or if my daughter has a child or whatever, it'll be 6 generations on that property.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So can you maybe explain that a little more? We have had other Métis people on the program before, so I think our listeners are maybe a little familiar with Métis, definitely with Louis Riel and the Red River. Oh, yeah. A little bit of that history, but I'm intrigued about the fact that your grandfather gave you the land. Is that because there's treaties as well involved with Métis people, or is it?
No, there's no treaty. There's no treaties involved with Métis people, though there is a treaty that's outstanding, unresolved from gosh knows when. Late 1800s. Yeah, but that's a for a completely different discussion. But this is actually script land, so it is traditional script land. I think one of your Cassidy Karen was talking about.
Explained
script.
It, yes.
Yeah, so this is one of those original pieces that was script land meant for Métis people, but obviously swindled and had many restrictions and things that prevented actual Métis people from acquiring the land that they were promised. So Yeah, so this is part of one of those small pockets. So Woodridge, Manitoba is one. I believe Winnipeg is also one.
Okay.
There's Saint Laurent. There's Saint Norbert. There's a bunch of little pockets
Okay.
of land. Yeah.
And it's how far from Winnipeg is Saint Laurent?
It is roughly door to door. It's about an hour.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's not too far. It's the northwest we have two big lakes in Manitoba, Lake Manitoba and Lake
Yeah.
Winnipeg. It's on the south point of Lake Manitoba.
Okay.
So,
Okay. And it's still, I mean, it's a Métis settlement. It's only
oh,
Métis people live. Yes.
absolutely. If you drive through there, it's through and through a full Métis town. There's almost every house has a Métis flag. Big fishing community. Big, lot of really important fiddlers have come out of
Oh
there.
yeah.
Emile Lavallée came out of there. He
Yeah.
is won awards, national awards. He lived across the street from where I am.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of prominent people have come out of Saint Laurent. Tracy Liost, who is an athlete, a young advocate for youth sports. Paul Chartrand, who's a scholar and a professor and a lawyer for Indigenous rights across Canada.
Right.
Many famous people.
Many famous people.
How about all the famous Métis come out of Saint Laurent?
I was going to say, including that famous graphic designer, Shaun Vincent.
I love it.
when you were growing up, even after you moved to Winnipeg, so you grew up very comfortable with your Métis heritage. It was a normal thing.
It's funny because we grew up like on the land. Like we were always outside there fishing, doing all sorts of things outside all the time. And I think that was a lot from my mom and my dad, but I think primarily from my mom. But we were always there. Yeah, growing up, we knew who we were, but there again, I am one of those stories where a lot of the knowledge and language wasn't passed down because of just that, the need to fit in. And here's a funny story. Here's a perfect example. So my mom spoke Michif and she spoke Soto and she knew some Cree as well. And, but she knew French and English because Saint Laurent, once the French settlers settled, it became a French town. So what ended up happening, of course, is French became the language, and a lot of the indigenous languages weren't allowed to be spoken. And so this mentality of when my mom growing up of those just don't fit in, I think kind of just stuck. And so in going to school, I remember in French, and I would come home. Of course, you would have your French, and I would ask my mom, Mom, how do you say this? And then she would say something, and then I would go back to my teacher, my French teacher, obviously non-Indigenous, and he'd go, "That's not how you say that."
Yeah,
like I've never heard of that before. And then I'd have to go back to my mom, and then I'm pitting these two people against each other. So
interesting.
My mom would always just say it the way he says it.
Yeah.
And so that's a short story on sort of the how it came to be, where I don't I wasn't sort of these weren't passed down. And
right.
And I think later in her life, she's passed now, but later in her life, I think she definitely regretted it because she got to see all of the protests and the movements from I Don't Know More to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, all of these things. She got to see it, and I think it kind of it gave her energy, which unfortunately came later.
Right.
But at least she got to see it, and I think at near the end of her time, I think she was very, very, very proud of who she was, which made me happy.
Yeah,
because I knew who I was, and I kind of connected. I more accepted who I was, and then through that, really kind of put my focus into who I was, and I did that kind of alongside with her. It's kind of strange, But yeah, that's how that came to be.
Do you think, and again, not to diminish the particular cultural heritage, but is it the same? I mean, I think a lot of immigrants will come in. There's a lot of Ukrainians, let's say, in Winnipeg, and maybe the second, third generation, the similar thing might happen. The parents might think, "Oh, we want our kids to learn English," and then they lose the language. Would you say that it's a similar experience, or is it different because Métis people are indigenous in that sense
Oh yeah. Oh no,
to the
100%.
land?
100%. 100%. My mom was Indigenous. My dad was non-Indigenous. So, and it's funny because they had four boys. I have three brothers, and so two are dark hair, dark skin, and then my brother Ryan and I are light skin, light hair. So it's kind of split down the middle. But I mean, I remember stories of my mom not feeling welcome, even in certain, events or situations on my dad's side. So absolutely due to, not only the color of her hair or her skin, but the stereotypes.
And she was recognized as
because
indigenous.
She was native, right?
Yeah.
So, which is a derogatory term today, obviously, but that was the term then, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it was and I remember her sadness in some days, and and my dad saying, "Don't worry about it," and telling me to go away. And there were a lot of, I remember situations of racism and discrimination and things like that. I remember that. So I mean, I don't blame her in any regard.
No.
At all. For her surviving, essentially, is what she did. She moved to the city when she was 15 by herself. 15, and so she was always a survivor. She was fierce, she was stubborn, but she was kind. So that's sort of the story behind that.
So when you were growing up, let's say, those adolescent years where I think all of us struggle with all kinds of things, were you also kind of struggling with that sort of an identity thing? Did you lose?
Oh, absolutely.
Or stray away and then have to come back to those indigenous roots or Métis roots?
At an early age, I remember always saying, and it's funny because, again, you're kids and you just don't know the right terminology. But I remember saying, "Yeah, I'm Native," and then people would go, "You're not Native," and I would be, "Yes, I am." Right. Yeah. So there was this like, "Yes, I am," but and you had to, and you got mad, and then of course, kids being kids. I mean, looking at it from their perspective, I don't look Native. So as a white passing, Michif guy, I can see that. But even at a young age, I knew who I was, right? And I remember going back and telling my mom, and then my mom would, she would always have some, way of just saying, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't make a big deal out of it." And so yeah, I definitely got support from her and my dad too. My dad was my dad was talking about two people that they say that soulmates don't exist. Absolute garbage. I witnessed it firsthand. Witnessed firsthand.
That's a great example. A lot of people don't have that. There. I was going to ask you about your dad. I mean, you said he was not Native. So I mean, in a sense, so you're Métis on your mother's side.
Yep.
But you're also a mix because your father is not Indigenous, so you're kind of double Métis, if I can say it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because it's like he's from the Powerview Pine Falls side, so he's on the other side of Lake Winnipeg. That's where he grew up, and French Catholic from a family of 14.
Wow,
big family. Oh yeah, it's just wild. Yeah.
At what point did you start with the art and feeling that you were drawn to that, to be more to artistic, and maybe deciding to be a graphic designer?
As far as I can remember, watching Bob Ross on Channel 3 PBS.
Wow.
Yeah, seriously. I would watch him, and I was just thinking about this the other day, watching him make these just basically just like creating these beautiful pieces of art so easily. And I went, well, that's easy. I could do that.
Yeah.
And so for years and years, I would try, not knowing he's using oils You're right. So super expensive paint, which you can blend forever.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm using
And you're trying to
watercolors.
watercolors. Yeah.
So at that point, grade two, grade three, I was creating Bob Ross replicas for my aunties,
Hmm.
so it just kind of went there. And then grade seven, as soon as there was an art class in junior high, that was it. Nothing else
Yeah.
mattered. It was just I became good friends with my art teachers even after
Yeah.
like and no, I just that's where I wanted to be. Math, social studies,
No.
forget it.
No, that's good.
No.
And of course you went on to study art as in university or in college, and now
Yep.
you're a graphic designer. Do you identify specifically as a Métis or
Oh
Indigenous
yeah. Oh,
designer? So that is
absolutely.
part of,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was just a natural it was a natural thing. So we had no money growing up. So we were poor. We were four kids, four boys in a two-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
And so it was my dad was a machinist. My mom had been like a manager of a Robin's Donuts for years.
Mm.
And so we were poor for, but we had fun. Um, we were close. My brothers and I were close, and we were on the outskirts of Winnipeg at that time. There was no settle. There was no like. There was nothing past where we were. It was just bush and trees. So we got to play. Essentially, was what like a field growing up, which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
But through college or through high school, I sort of knew where I wanted to. I knew what I wanted to do, and everyone kept telling you, go to fine arts, go to university, and there's no possible way I can afford that. No way. Because I actually moved out when I was 17
Mm.
and went to go live with my older brother. So I moved out at 17, got a full-time job for 5 years. I just worked to survive. And then I discovered, or I was told about this Red River College, now Red River Polytechnique,
Mm.
course called graphic design. And so I inquired, and I got the portfolio requirements. I entered, and boom, 3 years of solid work. Graduated. I took the graphic design and then the advanced graphic design. Got work right after.
Hmm.
Just discovered what it was like working in the graphic design field in the industry. Immediately recognized that it wasn't fun, but the job was fun. The atmosphere wasn't fun, but the work was fun. And
Okay.
so I think I remember saying, you know what, this could be a lot better. I mean, people could be treated better. I think the respect for designers and creatives could be better. So the natural path, a friend of mine, Ed Kidd, he was the executive director of what was called the Aboriginal Chamber of Commerce at that time, and he's a First Nation out of Fisher River, I believe. And he said, "You got to come. It's really great," because him and I were friends. And so he said, "You got to come. I know you're a designer. You should come to this big event. It's the AGM." So I went there. Immediately became a member, and I immediately loved being in an environment of just Indigenous people. It's really what it was. It was a room full of Indigenous people and leaders in all sorts of industries
Hmm.
and owners of all different businesses. And at that time, I was a graphic designer, like full at working already at a firm. So I knew a little bit about graphic design and what the possibilities were with it. And at that table I was having dinner at, I got my first client. He needed a logo. And so I did a logo for him, and then I got to do design based on me,
Hmm. Hmm.
representation of me,
Yeah.
and that was amazing to sort of have it to do your own thing and not have someone tell you otherwise. And then I fell in love. That was it.
Yeah.
And then that person referred me, and we got more referrals. So now I was really focused on, at that time in 2007, something that I don't think kind of existed, which was Indigenous graphic design.
Hmm.
And so it was pretty crazy that it all of these organizations and nonprofits and communities now they could see what was possible with design, right? And how you can really up your game in terms of your materials, your marketing materials, your brands, your logos, even a website. And I mean, I lost my shirt on every job, but I didn't care. I just wanted to do the job. I wanted to do the work and have that creative freedom. And so that's how that sort of came to be. And it was pretty
look at you now. You got your own company, Vincent Designs, and you're also, can I say that you're inspiring other young people, other Indigenous young people also, as they find their way? I mean, I know that you have a scholarship fund, the Vincent Design Scholarship Fund.
Yep.
Why is that important for you?
Because I had no opportunity. I didn't have anything. I literally wanted to give something back, I think. I mean, we have the capabilities, why not? And it's more of enticing people to get into the field, right?
Is it because young Indigenous people, I mean, because we're still stuck in this world where they're not encouraged, the teachers are not giving them ideas or encouraging them to actually strive to be whoever they want to be? Is that why? I mean, do we still have young Indigenous people who think, oh, I can't go to university, I can't go to college? Is that the reality still?
I think it's a combination of finding confidence and resources and support systems. I think that those are big factors.
Yeah.
Perhaps the college doesn't represent them. I mean, I don't know the answer. I just know that there's a demand in every industry for Indigenous workers. And I mean developers, photographers, that I know. They and don't get me wrong, they exist. Okay. They're just all hired, because there's a demand for them, and that's the issue. There's a demand for them, and there's just they're not there. So that's sort of why I made the scholarship, was just to sort of and maybe entice or support or give opportunity to anyone interested, and maybe help out people who are going down that path. And then on top of that, I always say, if you need any help with, portfolio or work feedback on work, let me know. So I also sort of give back that as much as possible as well. And I think it's just that I have the opportunity to do it. Why don't I? And,
absolutely.
I volunteer throughout the community as it is, so it's just something maybe that's natural for me.
We're almost out of time, but I don't want to let you go before I ask you. No, I want to ask you about. I mean, you designed the logo, the Walking Together logo for the Papal Visit, and I mean, everybody still talks about it. I still wear it on T-shirts. And tell me, what was that experience like for you to be part of that?
It seems so long ago now.
I know.
And it is like only a few months. It's just crazy.
I know.
I think that experience is phenomenal. Like, it's just everything about it, it was a huge learning experience for me. Absolutely massive, profound even, on many ways. The process itself, the actual design itself, then the journey of me going to Edmonton and West Métis to see the Pope twice, seeing it everywhere, and then learning on how important this logo was for everyone, and primarily people of faith, right? Like that's a big one. The big eye opener for me when I was at Métis, and seeing all of the survivors there, and how many were, Catholic, and how much it meant for the Pope to be there for them. Like, I'm sitting in the crowd. They plunked me in with the survivors, so all I was doing was handing out tissues.
Yeah,
and myself included, dabbing my cheeks. And so it was really powerful to be there. The whole thing was just incredible. That's all I can really say. There's just, one day maybe I'll write an article or a long blog piece with details.
Shaun, it's been a great. I mean, for me, it was just great to meet you and to work a little bit to be part of that. I think I can say I was a little bit contributed to the logo.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, you
And
did.
but thank you, and thank you for sharing with us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and to our listeners, Vincent Design, just look it up. There's a scholarship available for you, so
Yeah,
just
exactly.
apply, take his money, and run.
Sounds good. That's exactly what it's there for.
All right, Shaun, take care.
Okay, you too. Thanks so much.
In re-listening to my conversation with Shaun, I was struck by how much he spoke about his mother. Clearly, he had a great love and admiration for her. I wish I would have had a chance to know her. It is obvious that Shaun is proud of his heritage, even though much of it, including the language, was not passed on. This is a very common experience among Indigenous people in Canada. If you are a young person interested in pursuing graphic design studies, I encourage you to go to vincentdesign.ca so you can be inspired and also learn about the scholarship that they offer. Michele Sam has several undergraduate degrees and a master's in social work. She is a speaker, facilitator, and workshop leader, and is invited to do seminars and presentations all over. She was adopted into a Dutch Catholic family in Ontario as a 3-year-old. She now lives in her mother's ancestral land in the Ktunaxa territory in British Columbia.
Kisa Quishnam, Gapiniskis, Huagasik Misopaski, Husukis Kokani, Nelson Mayeki, Husukis Kokani. And so what I'm saying in Ktunaxa is, first of all, good morning, everyone. We're talking this morning, so good morning to anyone and everyone who's listening. My name is Michele, so that's been translated into Ktunaxa to Misafafki, and that I'm grateful for today, and I'm thankful for today. And so we don't have, so that's a normal greeting that we would have. Husokas kokani na kutsasis takti manashla krifka kapsin. And so what that translates into, it's not a direct translation, but what that directs, that interprets to is that I'm grateful that we're making space, that we're taking time for these big ideas. And so that's, those are really important welcomes.
And already I have about 10,000 questions to ask you. And I'm not going to pretend to even attempt to say your name in Ktunaxa. But so you said that Michele has been translated, but obviously, so what is the actual literal translation of your name in Ktunaxa?
So Misas Paski, Misas is Michael. We had a head chief named Michele or Michael, going back, I think it's the 1800s. And so I'm actually female, the woman Michael. So that's who I'm named after. Okay. And so that's what that translation is. And so names are really important because like we're called Indigenous people right now. That's because of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And Canada is now calling us Indigenous instead of Indian. I still have an Indian status card. I have Aboriginal rights according to the Canadian Constitution. People call me First Nation because we have band or reserves, lands reserved for Indians, which are called bands, and then the band community. So there's a lot of complication. And then for myself, because of self-determination and self-development and the names we call ourselves, I start with Ktunaxa Aksmuknik or Ktunaxa human beings. And that is how we would refer to ourselves. And so for me, it goes right back to your name, right? Who are you? So, and that's. Mm-hmm.
No, sorry to interrupt. This is fascinating. So Ktunaxa is you're a Ktunaxa. I love how you're a Ktunaxa human person. You're part of the Ktunaxa people. But you didn't always know this, Michele.
No, I didn't. I didn't.
you've had to go back and reclaim a lot of this and even the language. And I must say, I mean, you and I have known each other for a little bit now, and this is the most I've heard you speak Ktunaxa, and I know that is very important to you. So I do hope that we get a chance to talk about that. But can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what that was like?
And I have news for you. I did a 23andMe ancestry DNA genetic test and just got the results back. And as a result of that, I'm actually learning about my father's side. And so I was adopted out as one of the 60 Scoop kids. My mom went to residential school here in Ktunaxa homelands in Amacus, Ktunaxa at St. Eugene's Mission. And she was, I think, the fourth generation to go through that. As a result of my grandparents taking some of their children out of that school and crossing the line because they became international felons, my mom went into child welfare. And I see your face sort of furrowed brow. That's a whole other conversation.
But just to clarify, so your grandfather, when you said cross the line, you mean he went to the United States?
My grandmother and grandfather crossed the border because they took their children out of the schools, and they were graduates of the school, graduates, quote unquote. And so they couldn't stay in Canada because it was illegal for them to have their children. And so my mom was in child welfare, and when she aged out, she basically, the story is she got a bus ticket and first month's rent and, basically go wherever. And so she decided to go to Toronto. And so I was born in Toronto. She met my dad, who's from the East Coast. So he has Mi'kmaq background, Mi'kmaq, British, Acadian background, which I'm just learning about. And I'm actually meeting a cousin of mine this weekend for the first time ever. So I'm 54 years old. So I met my dad the first time when I was 23. I found out about my family, about my mother, when I was 23. I was adopted at 3 by a Dutch Catholic immigrant family in Richmond Hill, Ontario. And they were not told anything about my background. They were given the typical stories of I was abandoned, my mother was an alcoholic or whatever, all of those pathologies. That's what they were told. And through, sadly, or maybe not, through the church, there was a real push for good Catholic families to take in us, considered heathens, not doing very well. And so they did. And I was adopted as the youngest of their 7 children. And so they are very Dutch, right? Very short, petite, my sister's blonde, blue-eyed, beautiful voice, right, et cetera, et cetera. And I am almost 6 foot tall and, not a small woman at all, never going to be mistaken for a Dutch girl. And and that's how I was raised. And when I was 23, I found my family. I found out that my mom was one of the murdered and missing Indigenous women. She was murdered when I was 18. I have siblings from her, I'm the oldest of her 8 children. And they were raised, the youngest 4 were with her on and off, but the oldest 4 of us were all adopted out. And so, so I found them in 91, and started to try to make sense of my life at that point at 23 years old, and nobody had a clue of what I was talking about. And Native child and family in Toronto was just starting. And so I got to know a few people there who were really supportive of me getting my, making sense of my life, making meaning of my life. And so I ended up going to university, reconnecting to Indigenous communities in Ontario. Anishinaabe people from northwestern Ontario, Thunder Bay, and east and west really took me in and helped me to find some stability, and through cultural practice, right? So I was given a jingle dress, which is about healing. I was taken to my first powwow, and that became very much about my life and about, finding health and well-being and finding belief and so on and so forth. And then I did my university, and then I came home. I came to my mother's homelands, and been participating, in our self-development as Ktunaxa since. Yeah.
So now I have 10,000 more questions. Can we just go back a little bit to growing up in Richmond Hill, Ontario? Um, I mean, obviously you knew that you were adopted. You knew that, and I think that for regular people who are adopted, it's difficult. So how difficult was that for you? Did you feel that this was your family? Did you feel that you did not belong in this family? You struggled as an adolescent?
So my adoption, so I was 3 when I was adopted, and I was still seeing my mother, my mother, Patricia. And so I was with her on and off up until my adoption, and I've never seen my adoption record. My parents have never seen it either. So when they got me, I think, and my mother even tried to change my name, but I was already an established human being. Like, we know, the early years are formative for identity. And so I already had an identity, and it was pretty strong, right? And so being raised as the youngest of their children, and there were already issues in that family. I am a firm believer in this time of reconciliation that one of the biggest jobs we all have is to reconcile the historical trauma and the intergenerational trauma as human beings we have sustained through world wars, through famines, through COVID now, through all of these different things have had a huge impact on us, on our development, but also on our relationships and anyone coming from a different country coming here has sustained trauma. They're either leaving trauma, or the act of leaving your family is an actual trauma as well. And so that's to say that, my family is not unique in that. My adoptive parents lived through occupied Holland as teenagers. They came over, they left their entire family. So I wasn't raised with a sense of community. I wasn't raised with aunts and uncles on a regular basis. I wasn't raised with cousins. I wasn't raised with all of that family. And then on top of that, and neither were my siblings. And so on top of that, I was the only brown kid I knew about. In grade school, I very much fit into sort of quote unquote the Italian community because I'm very dark looking. So that was sort of a saving grace. But I was always different. I had a different worldview. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just saw things in a very, very different way. And so in high school, I made the decision in grade 6 to apply to go to what was then a junior high school, a Roman Catholic high school. And I did so because, one, it let me wear a uniform. My parents were not rich, and so I got hand-me-downs. Like I said, my sister was 5 years older than me and very petite, and I was soon start outgrowing her hand-me-downs. And I was being bullied in school. And so for me, a completely easy thing was to wear a school uniform. I won't have to deal with that, right? But in the high school, there were a bunch of us who were Indigenous, Indian. We were Native kids, and we all kind of found each other, but we never actually talked about it. We just knew, right? And so we'd kind of hang out. And my best friend, from that time, we're still friends, and she came and visited me this summer, and we were talking about that, just how her family history, how she ended up in Newmarket, Ontario, which is where we went to high school, the reserves around Newmarket where people had come to school from were being bussed in. Nobody talked about any of this. We never talked about any of this. And so, but found it just so fascinating that we all kind of found each other at the same time. Mm-hmm. So growing up, I ended up trying to kill myself at 12. I had, my parents believed in corporal punishment. And so, yeah, I had enough. And that was my way out of the pain and the suffering and not feeling like I'm good enough. And so ended up in a group home, and lots of crappy things happen. I'm going to try not to swear for you, but I was placed with a lot of kids that had a lot of social, emotional, and psychological issues. There I met other Indigenous people again, young people like myself who were put in situations that were just so foreign, and we didn't fare well. And so did that, went back, couch surfed. I didn't finish high school. So many things. But yeah, it wasn't, I'm so close to my adoptive family, because I came to recognize through university history, because I wanted to understand, first of all, when I found my family in Toronto, there was a lot of other people also finding their families as Indigenous people. And I was like, what the heck? I thought it was just me. They had one of three stories, you were abandoned. They don't know who you are. You were removed because of alcohol and drugs, or you were removed because of severe abuse. And so I was like, how do we all have these same stories? And so in university, I started with social work, and then I looked at English literature because I wanted to understand policy. And then I did a degree in Indigenous learning, which is philosophy based and about Indigenous peoples relearning who we are and how we are. And so, yeah, and found out that, the world is a crazy place.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was going to say, I mean, despite all you went through growing up, you did manage to go to university, and that in itself, I'm wondering, what was the one thing, do you remember? What would have been the one thing or the one person that motivated you or inspired you so that you could? Because I bet you that you probably didn't have the sense that you could go to university, or did you?
I always knew I was smart. So in high school, I had a history teacher who was very supportive. I had math and science teachers also who were like, you can do anything you want. And so at the time, I was asked, or my parents were asked, can she go to summer school to catch her up? And the decision was no, she needs to get a job. And so what I recognize now is that my adoptive family, my adoptive parents didn't finish high school because of the Second World War. My mom told me at the beginning of the pandemic, when the shutdown, because my son was in high school at the time, and she said, and I said, yeah, he's done. We don't know what's going to happen. And she's like, that's what happened to me. The war broke out, and the following Tuesday we were asked two questions, and that was it. And so I was like, oh my God, no wonder you didn't value education because you didn't have one yourself.
Yeah.
So, and then in addition to that, to those teachers in the high school, I have a sister-in-law who, and I just talked to her last week about this, and I talk about her a lot, who was doing a biology degree. She's a lab manager for a very big research science lab. And she would talk to me about her work and wouldn't talk down to me, wouldn't talk above me, right? She would just start talking and I'd be asking her questions. And then she reminded me that I had gone to her parents' house with her, and she had a bookshelf. And I looked at all the books and I was like, did you read all these? And she said, yeah, I had to. And I was like, huh. And so for me, it was like, okay, if she can do this, I can do this.
Yeah.
And that's very much how I teach now, because I teach in a local college, and
Yes.
I teach people, even if they're at college level or community education level, that, there's a certain amount of learning how to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and learning about what you want to learn, right? And to inspire you to think about the web of knowledge. So, yeah. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, we always, I think rely on other people to inspire us and motivate us, and I think all of us can be thankful. We can all find people in our lives, especially growing up, that would have done that for us. I'm going to jump ahead because you eventually did move back to British Columbia. Tell us a little bit about this community where your mother was from and where you live now, the Ktunaxa people.
Yeah, so when I was doing my master's thesis, well, I finished my undergraduate work at Lakehead University, and I felt like I knew nothing. And despite the 3 degrees, I was still like, I don't understand. And so I came home the first time through my master's thesis of looking at the perception of the welfare of our children. What does welfare mean to us as Ktunaxa people? And because the child welfare system is not about child welfare, it's a system, like it's a completely different system. And so I came home through that research, and that summer I interviewed probably about 100 people, 100 of my own people, many of who've passed now, who told me their life stories, and I told them my life stories, and they knew my mom, and they knew bits and pieces, and so then I decided to move home to my mom's community, because at the time I didn't know my dad. My dad had told me I was an Indian Italian Newfie, and I'd found out that there was a large Mohawk Italian community, and Mohawk people follow their mothers. They honor their fathers by following their matrilineal line. And so I thought, okay, to honor my father, even though I have no relationship with him, I will follow my mother. And so I came back here to Amaka's Ktunaxa or Ktunaxa homelands, and found out, I was registered as a status Indian to one community, met a grandmother who said, actually, your family belongs over here, because through the Indian Act, what happened is that we lost our matrilineal lines. And so my grandma, my great grandma, et cetera, come from one community, but we got registered to a different community up north. So my siblings still belong to that community. I belong to the community that I was told that this is where you're from. So, but I didn't land. I moved around a lot. I was too educated, right? I was intimidating to even my own people, because I was critical of our self-development. I was actually like questioning what we were doing and the decisions and the definitions that federal government or consultants would come in and give us. And I'd be like, well, hang on a second, that's related to, right? And explaining things to people, which made it so that it was like, it wasn't an easy answer. It wasn't an easy negotiation. It was actually, hang on a second, you're pulling a bit of a fast one on us. And so that's exactly what happened with Child and Family Services, is that we got delegation for what people said was child welfare, but really, in fact, it was child protection services. So the removal of children into the foster care system, not the entire system of how you raise human beings in a good way. And so that's where you get into the millennial scoop, is that we as Indigenous people have now been part of this process of removing our own people and taking on some of those ideologies that aren't ours. And so, lived here, lived in Prince George, went and taught in Prince George, went to UBC and did some research and led a research agenda over there, and started to do my PhD, looking at the reattachment of Indigenous peoples to landscapes and waterways as not a remedy, but as part of reconciliation and reattachment to place and healthy identity development. And then in 2013, my mentor passed away. So I came back to Cranbrook with my children, because my children were in need of a home. And so in 2016, I had the benefit and luxury and privilege, actually, of buying my first forever home. And so I'm a homeowner and living here in my homelands now, in Cranbrook, just outside of my reserve community.
Okay, so that was going to be my question. So Cranbrook, BC, for people that are familiar with British Columbia, that's just outside your traditional Ktunaxa homeland, or it's in the traditional homeland?
In the traditional homelands. It's called the East and West Kootenay now. And Kootenay is actually the anglicized word for Cockney. right? Which kokanee,
Yes.
right, is good, and it's also a fish now, but it's like it's all anglicized
Yeah, of
Ktunaxa.
course. Of course.
But the place where I live is actually traditionally called Kiskatlayet, which is where, like, between the two mountains, basically. I'm not giving you the correct interpretation. But and then my office where I'm looking right now actually overlooks what they call Mount Baker, but it's actually Akinmi, which is part of it's in our emergent stories. It's in our traditional stories.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I live in my homelands on purpose. It's the only place where I would buy a home. And I bought the home when I found out from Ktunaxa that we have a tradition of holding space or taking care of place for the use of family. So other places, they might think of it in terms of like trap lines or, hunting grounds or that sort of thing. And so when I heard that tradition, I thought, you know what, I will take up this place so that my children have a home to go home to, because I never did.
Yeah.
I've never had a home to go to. So
yeah. Well, you do now.
I do.
Yeah, you do. And Michele, I mean, I really hope that we can actually do this again, because there's so much more that we can be talking about. And we're almost out of time, but I don't want to leave you without asking you about learning the Ktunaxa language, because I know that there aren't very many Ktunaxa speakers, and you're learning it.
Yes. There are many, many young people who are learning it in earnest, who are doing a much better job of this work. It's interesting because when I first came back to do my research and I was giving concepts back to knowledge holders, to a few that are no longer here, we would talk about the words in English. And that's why child welfare became about the welfare of children.
Right.
Because child welfare was something completely else. And so we would talk through it, and then they would give me concepts in Ktunaxa. And then they would explain what those concepts mean. And so I talk a lot, as people can probably tell. And so I would talk through with them with dictionaries, and we would go through. And that's how I've learned the language, is to understand the concepts that are really important. I feel, I'm an infant speaker. I know how to say things that are important, that heart and content, right? Spirit content. I know how to say those things, and I use those terms.
Right.
And for me, it's songs as well, and stories, and participation in ceremony as well. But Ktunaxa is in danger of becoming extinct, and we have a lot of young people who are trying.
That's good to know. About how many native Ktunaxa speakers are still alive? I
would say under 20.
See,
I would say even less than that.
I'm so glad to hear that you're saying that a lot of young people are learning the language, because that's a very visible sign of what was done to your people and to so many First Nations across the country, that they lost the language.
Absolutely. And, it wasn't lost. It was stolen. It was purposefully stolen from us.
Michele, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today. I know that it wasn't enough time, but that's maybe a good excuse to get you back and we can hang out together again. Thank you for sharing a little bit about you and about your people and your ideas, your thoughts, your experiences with us today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Husuketh Kokani.
There were so many things that Michele said that moved me into deep thought and reflection. She said that she honored her father's people by following her mother's lineage. She said that already before she was adopted, her identity was already set. She also said that many of us, especially those who've left their countries to go somewhere else, experience trauma, and that trauma is passed down through generations. That is not something specific to Indigenous people. She also said that she is an infant Ktunaxa speaker, and that there are no more than 20 native Ktunaxa speakers in the world. There is lots to think about there. You can learn more about Michele and her work, and even invite her to speak at your event. go to her website, michelesam.com. Both Shaun Vincent and Michele Sam are very accomplished, and they show that no matter who we are, young people need connections to family, culture, language, and inspiration and encouragement from others in order to succeed. Perhaps that is something that we can all take away today. Who have you inspired today? To learn more about all Indigenous issues, especially as they intersect with the Catholic Church, and for resources, you can visit our website, slmedia.org/healing. To listen to all our Salt and Light Hour programs, and especially to other Indigenous Voices episodes, visit us at slmedia.org/podcast. And to watch all the events of the Papal Visit to Canada, and to read the Holy Father's addresses, go to slmedia.org/Pope in Canada. I'm Deacon Pedro. Thank you for listening to this special Indigenous Voices edition of the Salt and Light Hour.